Okay. Any second now. I gave this talk earlier this morning as well. And sort of 5 minutes after I started, loads of people came in. So let's hope that happens now, shall we? Because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us in the room altogether. So how many of you have done something with Windows Azure of some description? Ever played with VMs in Windows Azure? Okay. All right. So that's good. That's kind of that's what I was hoping for. It's not all that good to have people who already know all this stuff coming along to these things. So there's this phenomenon, which is the idea of pop-up labs. So the idea that you could pop a lab up, you could do something with it, and you could pop it back down again. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is just basically I'll talk about some of the technology, I'll do some demos, and I'm also going to just talk about the principle of that. As you can see, my name is Planky. Oh, my name is Steve Plank, but everybody actually calls me Planky. You should too. I've been that since I was 5. In fact, if people call me Steve, I often don't even look round. It's one of those sort of weird things. Now, in terms of resources, one of the very first things that you're going to want to do is to get hold of a free 90-day subscription. And that first link there will do that for you, aka.ms/azure_trial. What that gives you is 750 hours of a small compute instance. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. But 750 hours of a server, basically, per month for the first 3 months. So imagine you start your first month. Imagine you were to start it tomorrow. So your first month would start tomorrow. You start on 0 hours, and you start racking up hours. Let's just imagine you keep your server running 24 hours a day, one small server running 24 hours a day. There's 744 hours in a 31-day month, and so you're going to get to 744 hours, and you move into the next month. But let's imagine that you used a little bit more, and you got to 750 hours. Then what happens is you come to like a cap, because you will have an automatic spending limit. When you do the registration, you have to put some credit card details in there. That's an anti-fraud measure to make sure that people aren't continuously registering for free accounts and never actually paying. But what they also do is they put a spending cap on it of 0. So when you get to your 750 hours of free service, then your service will stop. So if you've got VMs running or a website running or a mobile service, that will stop running. You're then invited to remove the spending limit, and then you can continue on with your resources. Once you've removed the spending limit, then anytime you go above your free 750 hours, you get charged for the compute resources that you use. So you can have 750 hours in your first month, 750 hours in your second month, 750 hours in your third month, and then if you want it free from that point on, you need another credit card to register and go through the whole process of trying to fool them into thinking you're somebody other than you actually are. And you can do that probably for a certain number of credit cards, and it comes a point at which you're going to have to pay. And when you pay per hour for each compute resource that you use. You pay per gigabyte per month for each gigabyte you have in storage. You pay so many gigabytes for the data that comes out of the data center and onto the internet. So if you created a website, for example, and somebody was downloading a 1 gigabyte file, then there would be a charge for that actual data transfer. There's no charge for data transfers into the data center, and inside the data center itself, there are no charges. There are no charges for data movement. So if, for example, you had a web front end and that was doing an update to a SQL server, then there'd be no charge for that data moving inside that network. So the only time you pay for data charges is when you're pulling them out of the data center onto the internet and when you're storing the data. There's a few other sort of weird things that you pay for, but they're such tiny amounts of money that, even if you're getting sort of £10,000 a month bills, there's quite often things on there for 30p transaction charges and things like that. But it's, you get 100,000 transactions for 0.006 pence per 100,000 transactions. So they're tiny amounts of money. So that's your Azure trial. The next thing is the Windows Azure Training Kit, WATK. It's a great resource. It's a free downloadable kit. You can just sit there and you can just go through all the labs and understand how everything's working. I'd absolutely recommend that you do that. There are about 15 Azure virtual machine labs in there. And then we quite often run one-day camps. We run 2 types of camps. I do one which is aimed mostly at developers and one which is aimed mostly at IT pros. And actually, I find that probably about 30% of people come on to both of them, because they cover different things. The IT Pro one covers mostly pop-up labs and virtual machines. The developer one covers mostly a thing called Windows Azure Cloud Services. I'll explain what that is in a minute. And then finally, I'm recording this today. I've got, I'll do the screen capture and I've got a microphone, so I'm recording what I'm saying. So if you want to see this presentation afterwards, then you'll be able to watch the video of it. It'll be on my blog, which is at Plankytronics there. It's got 2 X's on Plankytronics, me trying to be arty. Okay, so I'm going to hit one more slide and then there's going to be no more slides. It'll be demo and a little bit of flip chart. So pop-up labs are basically this idea that, children have these pop-up books, don't they? It's a book, they open the book up and a lion pops out, or they move on to the next page and a rocket appears or something like that. That's what a pop-up book is, and that's basically what a pop-up lab is. You pop the lab up for the amount of time that you need it, you pop it back down again. So I just want to give you a feel for how quickly you can do something like create a virtual machine that runs in one of the Windows Azure data centers. So I've got the portal here. This is the virtual machines portal, and I've got other facilities available in Windows Azure. I can create websites, mobile services, cloud services, databases, can create storage accounts, create virtual networks which I can link my corporate network to the Windows Azure network. I can create SQL reports. There's a whole bunch of add-ons. These are things like backup service, monitoring services, these sorts of things. And then some things like service bus, that's application level messaging between 2 endpoints. Media services, so for example, 4,000 hours of the Olympics were streamed over media services before it was announced. So a lot of people don't actually realize that. Active Directory, so this is not, you would think a thing called Windows Azure Active Directory would be Active Directory running in Windows Azure, wouldn't you? You could be forgiven for thinking that, bearing in mind its name. It's not. It's a directory service, but it's not Active Directory. So think of a directory service, but not in the way that you think of Active Directory. It's an internet-scale directory service which is used for internet-developed applications. You can't, for example, domain join anything to it, just to give you an example of that. I've got quite a few videos about Windows Azure Active Directory on my blog, so if you go there, you should be able to see them. And then bunches of settings like who your co-administrators are and certificates and stuff like that. But the thing that I want to really concentrate on is this bit here, virtual machines. So if I want to create a virtual machine, I go New, Virtual Machine from the gallery, and if I pick the images, I've got Windows Server 2012, Server 2008, R2, SP1. How much do I pay for these things? Well, in the pricing here, this gives you an idea. So this is what you get for free. You get 750 hours of a small instance, which is 1 core and 1.75 gigs of RAM. And if you go above your 750 hours, then you'll be paying just over ½ per hour for that until you can see, you get a little tiny discount here. Look at that, look, you're getting 0.0063 pence per hour discount. But that could be quite significant on a ½ offer. Then what you'll notice is that if you go to a medium instance, that's 2 and 3.5. It doubles the number of cores and doubles the amount of RAM. And guess what it does? It doubles the amount that you pay as well. If you go to large, that's 4 times the number of cores and 4 times the amount of RAM, so you pay 4 times as much. Extra large, 8 cores, 8 times the RAM, you pay 8 times as much. And then there are a few memory-intensive sort of applications that you might want to use. Here you're talking about 28 gigs and 56 gigs of RAM, and you can see it's £1.29 an hour for a 56 gig 8-core machine, or 64 pence an hour for a 28 gig 4-core machine. So those are the machines that are available, and they can be used not just as VMs, they can also be used for cloud services, which I'll talk about that in a little while. Okay, so I can pick one of these things. When I do this, Windows Server and the CALs are included in the price. So you're paying ½ per hour if you use it for an hour, and if you could manage to get 10,000 users connected to that for an hour and using it, if you could get that kind of performance out of it, those 10,000 CALs are included in that. The same with SQL Server. So I've got a bunch of SQL servers here. They're more expensive. If I go into the pricing thing and I go and search out SQL Server, let me just go back and have a look at it. I think I just passed it there, didn't I? SQL Server. We'll see if I come down here like a small instance of SQL Server. You can see we've got Web, Standard and Enterprise. This is just the size of the database. And you can see here it's £13.5 pence per hour as opposed to half a penny per hour. But that includes the license for SQL, so you don't have to buy a SQL license.
Does it include monitoring of that, or is it just the license?
Sorry, say it again?
Does that include monitoring, or is it just the license that's included?
Monitoring, what do you mean by that?
The instance, do you monitor the instance for failures?
Oh yeah, we monitor the instance for failure. So if, you know, for example, if there's a failure and your instance falls over, then we'll reboot it for you. Those sorts of things. Yeah, but the price that you're paying is for the number of hours that you consume that it's up and running, and for the license of the software that's running on there. So for example, if I go back here again, you can see I've got BizTalk here as well. There's a trial of SharePoint Server 2013, and eventually that will become one of the SKUs that's on the list here, and you'll be able to pay, and there'll be a price, and you'll pay per hour for your usage of SharePoint 2013. There's a whole bunch of Linux machines here as well. You can see these OpenSUSE, SUSE, Ubuntu, and OpenLogic. There's no Red Hat yet, but we're working with Red Hat to get that on the list. It requires, you know, the integration services components that you have for Hyper-V and, you know, pretty much any virtualization technology. So we're working with them to try and get those to work. And, you know, there's lots of politics going on. But once the politics are out of the way, the techies will get that all working. So those are the platform images. There are images I've created myself, so I've created a couple of SharePoint 2010 images because there isn't a 2010 image available.
Can a customer import an image, or are they all Verizon Gold images? They're all Microsoft Gold images that you present?
So I created these in the same way that you could create them.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, can a customer import their own image in terms of the config of the OS, or do they have to spin off your own standard image and make it bigger?
So you could create one on Hyper-V, for example, configure it, sysprep it, and then upload it to Windows Azure, and then have it appear in that list up there. So yeah.
So you can create your own configuration.
You can, yeah. And then these are the disks for all the systems that I've sort of booted in the past. I had a bit of a clear out recently because I had about 140 something disks for systems that I built in the past. These are just basically disks. I could just pick one of these and say, you know, boot it, and it will boot it up into a configuration. It's just as if I've had a Hyper-V image, I've shut it down, and now I'm booting it again. So what I'm going to do is I'll pick one of the platform images. I'll pick Server 2008 R2 SP1. I'll go through this process. So then what I do is excuse the up and down on the screen here. We got the best projector in this room of all the rooms, but it's still only 1280 by 800. And then I pick the release date. So I'll pick the latest one, 20th of May. I've got to give it a name. So let's call this VM User Group 2 because it's a demo this morning. I then pick the size. So let's say a small. I can't use admin or administrator, so I usually use Planky. I've got to specify a password. And move on to the next page. And then I could create a standalone virtual machine. It will have a DNS name. So let's call this Planky VM User Group. So its name is going to be plankyvmug.cloudapp.net. If I want a name other than that, then I can use a CNAME record at, you know, my DNS provider. If you're doing this, I would recommend that the first time you do it, or the first couple of times you do it, get it to just automatically generate a storage account for you. It'll just automate that whole process. But I put all my stuff into this storage account I've already got created. And actually, before I do that, let me just show you. These are the places. I can go West Europe, West US, East US, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and North Europe. So there are 8 data centers. There's 4 in the US, North and South, West and East. There's 2 in Asia, Singapore and Hong Kong. And there's 2 in Europe, Dublin and Amsterdam. Dublin is North Europe. You would think it would be West Europe, wouldn't you? Because it's west of Amsterdam. But Dublin is North Europe, and Amsterdam is West Europe. We actually found out the reason why they did that, and it's because in the United Nations, the designation of the areas for these countries, Ireland is in North Europe and Holland is in West Europe, according to the UN, and that's what they followed. So even though it makes no sense whatsoever, that's the case. Now, there's no tool in here to do that, but what I can do is I can basically copy the file to my local machine and then copy it to one of the other data centers and fire it up there.
It would never move out, so I'm just thinking sort of data protection, stuff like that.
No. Unless you take specific action, like copying the file and then rehydrating it somewhere else, it will always stay in the data center in which you create that VM. Yeah.
Can you turn down without losing data and achieve a lower level
turn down.
Like the kind of keep the storage running, so keep the data, but turn down the virtual machine. And
You can, but what you can't do it live. You have to shut the machine down, change the configuration to a smaller size machine, then boot it back up again.
Okay, so it doesn't have that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to use a storage account, one that I always use. That's this one, and it happens to be in Dublin, and that means that the only choice I get here now is North Europe or various affinity groups and virtual networks, which I'm not going to talk about in this talk. So I'll pick North Europe. Click Next. PowerShell is automatically enabled, or remote PowerShell is automatically enabled. And I have the ability to create an availability set here. So what that means is I could create 2 VMs, put them into the same availability set, and what the data center will guarantee is that those 2 VMs will be in different racks, they'll be on different routers, different power supplies, different battery backup units, all of that kind of stuff, so that if a failure was to occur with, say, power supply, then only one of the machines would fail. So this is great for when you've got like a web front end and you're scaling a number of web servers across, across a platform. Okay, so I click OK, and that goes away. That's now, I've got a few things in there. Let me just show you this one. So that's now going through the process of creating the virtual machine. Okay, that's going to take somewhere between sort of 6, 8, sometimes 9 minutes. So we'll let that go away. But another thing I want to show you is I've already got, you can see it's here, it's starting the provisioning process now. So it's got to get hold of the image, it's got to copy it across to the hypervisor host. It's a Windows Azure hypervisor, not Hyper-V. It's based on Hyper-V, but it isn't Hyper-V. Okay, it's designed to run in Windows Azure. But it copies the disk across, puts it onto the hypervisor host, boots it up, configures all the networking, all that kind of stuff, and then boots it up. So in a minute it says starting, it's now stopped. In a few moments it'll go into the running state, and that'll be while it's booting up. Okay, so I've got another one here which is called IIS1, and that's already running. If I for example scroll across here and copy that URL, I've got IIS running on that machine. So I've already connected to it. I've already connected over RDP, and I've got it running in there. So if I go like this, you'll see it'll give me the IIS, the default IIS web page, which I have modified very slightly just to demonstrate something. So there's the default IIS web page, and I just put that little thing in there so that you know it's coming from my first IIS server, IIS1. So now if I go back to the portal and I create another one, new virtual machine from gallery, I'm going to go to my disks this time. I'm going to pick, see that IIS2? I'm going to pick the second IIS server that I created some time ago. The 15th of April is when I created it at that time, and other identifiers on there. So I'll pick that disk. What do I want the machine name to be called? IIS2. I can just use a small machine for it. Then I can connect to an existing virtual machine, and this gives me the opportunity to put that machine into the same service as the previous one that I've already got created. So now I'll have 2 machines in the same service, and the reason for doing that is I can connect them both up to the same load balancer. They're on their isolated network segments, so nobody else can connect to them. None of my other machines can connect to them. Nobody else in the data center can connect to them. So I'll connect to this existing virtual machine. And when it says connect to an existing virtual machine, it's not really right. It should say connect or join with. So it's not as if this machine is making a connection to an existing virtual machine. It just says they're both on the same network segment. That's all it basically means, which means they can both share the same load balancer. Okay, so I'll say OK to that, and that's going to now go away. If I close this down and just show you what is actually running. So I'm creating 2 virtual machines at the moment. One of them was the one that I created from scratch. The other one is going to join that configuration. So let's just have a look. VMUG2, you can see that's running, provisioning. It flips in and out of this state, and you can see I've got a few other machines here which are running, and that is a SharePoint infrastructure that I've already got deployed. So that one's running. I bet you that's not, it says it's running, but as soon as I try and connect to it, actually it might be running because it was a disk that I'm rebooting, so it's not doing the whole provisioning. Most of it's already configured. So what I could do now is connect to that machine. So let's try. Connect. So this opens a RDP connection for me. It gives me a .rdp file, and I can enter my credentials. Connect into it. Notice it goes over a weird port number, and that's because I've got two machines. They've both only got one IP address because they're connected to a load balancer, so how can I distinguish between which machine I'm going to connect to if I RDP into one IP address? And I specify the port and the load balancer routes based on that. Okay, so I'll click this. And when we get in here, I'm going to show you a file. Okay, let's open up the file manager. And if I go down into inetpub www and I look at, I think it's that file there. That says IIS1. Oh, have I connected to the wrong machine? That says IIS1 as well, doesn't it?
You did connect to the bottom one, I think, as well.
Oh, right, okay. All right, well, imagine I did this to the other one because I'm going to lose too much time. That would have said IIS2. And the reason that that's significant is if I now go back to the portal, I should have connected to that machine. Oh, it's still starting, look. No wonder that seemed to be quick. Well, that's okay. So if I copy this and go into a new tab, so that's the name of my service. It's iisplanky.cloudapp.net. So let me just try and explain what's going to happen here. I've got a machine called IIS1, got a machine called IIS2. They're both running IIS. I am going to connect both of them to this load balancer, and requests are going to come in here. They're going to come into a service called iisplanky.cloudapp.net. Okay, so this is port 80, which has been shared out, port 80, which has been shared out, and I'm going to create a connection to say I want port 80 here to map onto port 80 over here. Okay? And what will happen is the requests that come in will be load balanced across. So I see a request come in here, and sometimes it'll go this way, and sometimes it will go this way. It's not round-robin load balancing, it's a modified round-robin load balance where they have an algorithm, because this is actually a Windows Azure application that runs the load balancer. And they have an algorithm, and that algorithm is under constant revision. It's constantly changing. It probably changes every day. We don't really know what it is, but you'll see some load balancing there. So let's just have a look and see how we've done.
Is there a limit to how many VMs you can have connected to a particular load balancer?
There is, but it's pretty big. You know, it's like 10,000 or something like that. It's a huge number. Yeah. So I've got two of those machines which are running now. So if I go back to this thing here and I start, as soon as it comes alive, I get the first one. It should say IIS1 because I haven't connected the load balancer up for the second one. So that's IIS1, okay? And I can request that as many times as I want. It'll always say IIS1. So what I do now is I go back to IIS2, and in the endpoints here, I can connect up an endpoint, and I can load balance it on an existing endpoint. That one there, which is the existing endpoint that I've got for IIS1. And I go like this, give it a name. HTTP. Public port is 80, that's the one connected to the internet. The private port inside the load balancer is port 80. Say OK to that. So it's going to do the update. This takes a little while. And then I should be able to go back to it and I should be able to load balance between the two. So it'll sort of go, it'll probably go, more than likely, IIS 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. It sort of, it starts off going quite well between them, and then it gradually gets worse and worse, worse and worse. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Okay, so what this says is all the things which have been successful here, it says dismiss completed, so I can just click that, and I know there's only one thing going on now, and that's adding that final endpoint to that IIS machine. So I'm just going to wait. So that's finished now. So now, if I go back here, I should be able to refresh this page. Oops, I think that's all right. Did it refresh? No, it's still refreshing. And of course, the first time you hit IIS, I think that's probably, yeah, I was going to say, I thought that would have gone to the second one. You can see it says IIS2 because it was taking a long time to respond. Of course, the first time you hit anything, hit an IIS server, all the classes have to be spun up and all that kind of stuff. So now we should see IIS1 again, IIS2. So it's load balancing between the two of them. IIS2, see, did 2 IIS2s then. IIS1, it probably do 2 of these. Oh no, it's back to IIS2, IIS2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh no, it got to 8. 1, 2. You can see what I mean. So it's not exactly round-robin load balancing, but there is some intelligence going on there. And if we were super bright, we could probably work out what the pattern was and why it was doing it. But I don't think we are. Okay.
Someone was playing a Fibonacci sequence or something.
So it's something along those lines. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've got our machines provisioned. We've got that VMUG is a machine which is provisioned. I can connect to that. You know, I could connect to that. Was it this one here? No, that was the IIS box. Sorry, I did connect to that one earlier, didn't I? Connected into it, and I could install IIS. I could install SharePoint. I could install all of those sorts of things. Now, I've actually got.
Can you connect that VM to a local ISO image so you could install applications without having to?
No, no. What I'd have to do is convert the ISO image into a VHD, upload the VHD, and then attach a disk. So I have the option on all of these things here, like this, for example. Whoops, let me go back. Let's pick that one there. I can attach an empty disk, or I can attach a disk which I've already uploaded stuff to. So if I can show you where I've got this actually working. In my, this is a SharePoint environment. I've got a SharePoint server here, they're in a farm. I've got a SQL server and an Active Directory domain controller. If I look at this one, I could click attach, but I can show you the ones I've already got attached on here. So I've got, going to the dashboard, I've got an operating system disk and I've got a data disk. The data disk contains Active Directory. So the directory information tree, you know, sysvol and NTDS is on that volume. On the SQL server, I've got a similar thing, but I've put my, my data, there's the operating system, there's the data, and there's the logs and backup. So I can attach, you know, other disks, and I've got my own disk with lots of products on it, so when I want to install stuff, it's much quicker for me to do it. But you can always go outbound over the internet using a web browser to wherever you can, if you're using MSDN, for example, and download products that way. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is just quickly to show this. So what I did here, though, was in order to get SharePoint to run, you need Active Directory. And to get Active Directory to run, we've got a little bit of a challenge, which is the way the network works. So I create a service, and this one is called SP2010 Planky, I think. Can you see it there anywhere? SP2010planky.cloudapp.net, that's the name of that service. And I put a number of machines into that service. So if I put the first machine in there, and what happens, there's a little bit of sort of built-in functionality here, which says I will give an IP address to that machine. But it's not predictable. If that machine shuts down and it reboots, then it could get a different IP address because it's not a DHCP address, it's a dynamic IP address, a DIP. So we have DIPs. And a DIP is basically the same as a DHCP, exactly the same as a DHCP address, but it's got a 168-year lease on it. But the thing is, if I remove the machine and I bring it back in again, then because the network configuration changes, it loses all that configuration, and so it'll get a new machine, a new name. So what I have to do is forget about this built-in stuff here, which is just automatic. That's how all the, when I created the VMUG, I created that very first machine, it just got its IP address automatically. And when I created IIS2, it got its IP address automatically. But I can put this service on top of a virtual network. And in that virtual network, I can create a subnet. And then I have control over the address space. So I specified that this should be in the 10.0.0.x subnet space. And the first machine that goes in here will be 10.0.0.4. And because the mechanism for giving these addresses out is consistent when I'm on a virtual network, if I shut that machine down and reboot it, it's going to get exactly the same IP address back again, which is exactly what you want when you have a domain controller running DNS. Because if that's the ADDC and the DNS server, because the next thing I want is a SQL server, and I want to domain join it, which means it's got to be able to find that IP address. So it has to be consistent. So if this machine falls over and comes back into the configuration, it wants to come back at the same address. And then I put a couple of SharePoint servers. I domain join those into this domain. So they're all part of the Plankytronics domain, and everything is working. So I've got 10.0.0.4, 10.0.0.5, 10.0.0.6, and that one's actually 10.0.0.8 because this morning I had another machine that was in between those two and it was broken. So, and I tried to fix it and I couldn't fix it because I just don't know enough about SharePoint, so I've deleted it and I've just created a brand new one in there. So there just happens to be a number missing. Okay, so when I've done that, then what I can also do is connect these two up to the load balancer. Say this is port 80, this is port 80, and out here this is port 80. And that means any users who are sending requests in from their computers and their laptops and so on, they're going to hit the load balancer, and the load balancer is just going to load balance across these two SharePoint servers. So I can actually run an entire SharePoint infrastructure in the cloud. Now, one of the other things I can do is I can take my on-premises network down here, and I can link this virtual networks address space into my on-premises network if I've got a VPN device down here. So if I've got a VPN device there, and there's a list of which ones they are, basically all the Juniper and Cisco VPN devices, but that list will increase in the future. Then it looks to all the machines in here as if I have just got, it's just a router, and it looks as though all of these machines, these 4 machines, are part of my network here. So if I want users to use the SharePoint over the internet, they'll come in through this mechanism straight into the data center, which means if I've got things like Windows authentication, they're going to be prompted for credentials and that sort of thing. But if I've got it running here, then if I've got integrated security, then they're not going to be prompted for credentials because they'll have done their AD login when they got in at 9 o'clock in the morning and immediately went and sat down and had a cup of coffee. So I can just show you that running here. So there's my 2 SharePoint servers, so I should now be able to do exactly the same thing, get hold of a URL. So let's use that URL here. So sp2010 planky.cloudapp.net, and hit this, and there's my site. Now, the thing with SharePoint is all of the content of SharePoint is stored in a database. So how can I tell if I'm on the right server or not? Well, some files aren't. Image files and icons are stored in the local file system. So what I did is on my SharePoint server number 3, I went into the file system and I modified that icon there. Now if I keep refreshing, you can see I modified number 1. Oh, I've just switched my wireless off. I modified the icon on SharePoint server number 1 there. So this is just the only way I've really got in SharePoint of telling that I'm getting the data from either one SharePoint server or the other SharePoint server. But what that basically means then is I've installed a domain controller, a SQL server, 2 machines into a SharePoint farm. I've connected them up to a load balancer, and I have a complete load balanced SharePoint infrastructure. Now the reason that this is really interesting from a PopUp Labs point of view is because not only can I go through the process of setting that up, and I can tell you that it takes about half a day to do that, because by the time you've installed AD, and the sort of thing, you have to have AD running before you can domain join any of this stuff. So although you can kick off some of these installs in the first place, you have to hang around for AD to install. Then you can domain join the SQL server. But then you've got to configure the SQL server so that these things can connect to it. So a lot of this stuff is sequential stuff. But if you're going to build a SharePoint infrastructure, this is a really simple infrastructure that you could build. And that becomes a tool that you have in your back pocket then. So let's imagine that you're on a client's site, you're there sorting out some SharePoint problem or other, and you think, I wonder, does it work that way? I don't really know. I have a pop-up lab. So what you can then do is fire up your pop-up lab, do whatever experimentation you want to do in a safe sandboxed environment where if you get it wrong, it's not going to ruin the customer system. Yes, That's the configuration change I need to make. Apply the configuration change to the system, and if you've done it in a safe environment. So think about the sort of labs that you could build in this kind of an environment. You could build a SharePoint lab, you could have an AD and SQL lab, you could have a System Center lab. All of these sorts of things, you could just have them all sat around. Okay, so why is this important? Well, in the first 3 months, it's really important because when you look at what you get, if all of those were running on small instances, and I've got some of them running on medium instances, I think, but I can't remember. Let me just show you. Let's go back here. So the domain controller is on, whoops, I keep missing that dashboard thing there. Is on a, can you see the instance size? Oh, size. That's on a small instance, okay? The SQL server is on a, have I missed it somewhere?
Medium.
Can you see it where?
Medium, yeah. Right in the middle of the page now. Just by cursor.
Just by where?
Just by the cursor.
Oh yeah, there it is. I've got word blind there. Okay, so that's running on a medium, so I'm using my hours up twice as fast on that one. What about the SharePoint servers? Let's just do one of them. That one is, oh, that's also a medium. Okay, so I'm using up the hours at my domain controller. I'm using 1 hour per hour. My SQL server, I'm using 2 hours per hour, and my 2 SharePoint servers, I'm using 2 hours per hour. I think the reason that I put them onto the original SharePoint server, SP1, might be a small. I can't actually remember. Oh no, that's also a medium. Because they take such a long time to spin up, and I'm in a demo sort of environment, and I've got 50 minutes to get through a talk, I tend to put them on slightly more powerful hardware than I normally would. But I can guarantee you that if you run all of these on a small instance size, although the very first time you use it, it takes a while to spin up, and you could never possibly, service 100 users with it, just yourself, or just you and a colleague, you could easily do this. So let's assume then that we can get all this running on small instance, which means I'm using 1 hour per hour. That means every hour I'm reducing my 750 hours by, what's it in that case, 4 hours. So I got 750 hours divided by 4 gives me 187.5 hours per month in which I could run this infrastructure. So, if you think about things like working days, for example, a working week's 37.5 hours, isn't it? So if you come in the morning and you fire your SharePoint lab up and you make sure that you shut it down before you go home, then you've got, what, 37.5 times 5, let's do this, 25, 5 7s are 35, carry 3, 3 5s are 15, 16, 17, 185.5. So you've actually got a few hours, you've got 2.5 or 2 hours left over. You could run this for 5 weeks. Oh, sorry, you could run 37.5 hours for 5 weeks, and it wouldn't cost you anything whatsoever out of your 753 hours. So you get 753 hours as long as you were to come in the morning, fire up your virtual machines, use them throughout the day as your, your aid memoir, your test environment, whatever you want to call it, and then fire them down, shut them down again. It wouldn't cost you anything for 3 months to be able to do that. And of course, you can be even better than that because you can say, well, actually, I only really do SharePoint stuff on Tuesdays at my customer. I regularly visit my customer on Tuesdays. There's always some problem or other, and I don't usually get to that till about 11 o'clock. So you could actually, just fire these things up and pop them up and pop them down whenever you need them. And if you are really rigid with yourself about doing that at the times that you need the labs and not doing it at the times you don't need the labs, then what you've got is a very flexible system. Even if you're paying for it, this is a half a penny per hour. So let's just say you need a lab for a couple of hours to do some kind of verification whether that configuration is what's causing the error or whether it's something else. Fire up your lab, take the configuration, apply it to your lab, find out if it does that or not. It might take you 2 hours to do that. So that's going to cost you, well, it was just over half a penny, wasn't it? So for 2 hours, it's 1 penny. So it's going to cost you 4 pence to do that for a few hours, plus the storage.
Lab in one go, and can you then have
Right, so yeah.
PowerUp, so you can say I want my DC up first, and then I want you to bring me the...
Yeah, so what you do in that environment is you use PowerShell. So the way that I'm showing you to do all of this stuff is, if you were going to create the lab in the first place, I think it's quite a good idea to knife and fork the whole thing through, you know, create the machine. Don't automate any of this, just go through the whole process of building the lab, get it the way that you perfectly want it. Then you've got the disks. So you shut the whole thing down, you've got the disks, and you can use PowerShell scripts. So I've got PowerShell scripts here, which do various things. Let's just have a look at some of these. May VMUG. So what this one does is it boots this one boots a SharePoint 2013 infrastructure consisting of 3 servers, AD, SQL, and a single SharePoint 2013 server. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we're okay. So I've got some data first of all. This is things like, you know, the location it's going to be, the virtual net it's going to be on, the subnet, the name of the service. So this one will be shpt.cloudapp.net. Some VM configuration stuff. So this is basically the names of the virtual machines: SharePoint DC, SharePoint SQL, and SharePoint 1. You know, I said the DNS server address. Do you remember on this diagram back here? I said this machine needs to be able to find this machine. It needs that address. So I've got a DNS entry in there which talks about this. So that DNS server address is going to be configured into the adapters on all of these machines here. So they'll always be able to find the DNS server. And then I've got the actual disks. So there's the SharePoint Domain Controller Operating System disk. There's the SharePoint SQL Operating System disk, and so on. I've got all the disks which are mentioned here. And these are the same as the ones which were, where's it gone? See that name there? That's a disk name, and I just need to find the relevant disk name for my SharePoint configuration. Okay, so first thing I do then is I take that DNS server address and I feed that into an object over here which is called my DNS, and that then becomes a DNS configuration for an adapter, which I will use later. The next thing I do is I take all of this configuration here. I've got this thing called New Azure VM config. So I take all of this configuration here, and whoops, why is that not working? All of that configuration there, and I pump all of that into this object here, which is called VM SharePoint DC. So let's just have a quick look at that configuration. That's the name of the machine, SharePoint DC. That's the size. That is the disk that it's going to come from. I would normally add a data disk, but I didn't do that in this case. That's the subnet it's going to go into. I'm going to automatically enable remote desktop onto that port. Okay, so all of that configuration goes into this configuration object here. And then what I do is I call new Azure VM, and I say, create me a new Azure VM, put it into this service, put it into this virtual network, and there is the SharePoint, is the object which contains the configuration. So I want you to use this configuration, and I want to use that object there, which is the DNS name. So I get all my configuration done, I get the DNS, I get all of that stuff, I call new Azure VM, and I just get it to build that for me.
You mentioned that you put a data disk on, and earlier you mentioned that you don't just pay for the power of the VM, but also for however many gigabytes you're using.
Yeah.
Does it base it on the true size, like the thin provision size, or is it on what you say? So if you give that a 60 gig data drive, but you're only using 10 gig of it, or you build on 60 gig or 10 gig?
10. So it's the actual
not
what you're using, yeah. Okay, so I've got first of all here I'm deploying the Active Directory domain controller. I know that's going to go at 10.0.0.4, and there's the code to do that, and I just explained that. Then I do the SQL server, so that's the second machine, and then I do the SharePoint server itself. So if I run that piece of script, it should go away and provision a machine for me. So let me just clear this out. So we should be able to see it working. I'll go in here. Right, so I run that. So it's now executing the script, and the way that this works is it's talking to an API which is called the Service Management API, or the SMAPI, which is a REST API. So you've got, you know, the Windows Azure data center, and remember there's 8 of them around the world. So I'm talking to Dublin. I've got an API here, which is called the Service Management API. And this is a REST API. So I've got my portal over here, and all the stuff that I do in this portal, I'm clicking various buttons and all that kind of stuff. Or I've got PowerShell here. So all the different PowerShell commands that I type in, what they basically do is they all make calls into the Service Management API, which then does things like provisions a virtual machine, sets its DNS address to 10.0.0.4, sets its machine name to SHPT, puts it into a service called SHPT1, puts another machine there, and all that configuration stuff that I was talking about. And the way that PowerShell works is PowerShell is a synchronous thing, you know, so you execute the first line, or you can do things asynchronously, but you execute the first line, and then it waits for completion, and it moves on to the next line, and the next line, and the next line. So what this is going to do is the Service Management API, or I tell it what to do, the Service Management API does it, it starts creating the first machine, and then the first machine starts booting. But as far as the Service Management API is concerned, it's finished, because it doesn't have to wait for the whole machine to boot. All it has to do is say, I've done my job of provisioning a machine. The operating system can take on from that point, but it then returns. It comes back to my code, finds the next line of code, which says provision the next machine. So it goes on and provisions the next machine. In the meanwhile, this one is booting. And then we come back. And so in this case, it's going to take, you know, a sort of a certain number of minutes for that environment to be built, but it will automate that whole build process. I could, if I wanted to, you know, if I really wanted to, do some of the async stuff and sort of kick 3 builds off at the same time. But I think it's quite a nice thing to build these things in the order that you built them, because then you know that the sequencing is correct. It depends on how complicated your labs are. But if I always provision the domain controller first, I'm going to have a good address that I can put into these 2 machines. So there you go. Look, it says it's created the SQL one as well. So it's probably created 2 of them now. Oh, yep. Let's just look up here.
What's the how are you connecting your PC to the API? What's the method?
Okay, how does it know, you know, how to talk to this? I have to download a publish profile first of all.
Right.
So if you do the labs, in, you know, the Windows Azure Training Kit labs, there's a PowerShell lab, gets you to provision a domain controller, and what you do is you log into this portal. There's a button that allows you to download a thing called a publish profile, which has got secrets in it, certificated secrets. You then use a PowerShell command to import that, and it says, right, I now know what I'm talking to. So from that point on, all the commands that I type or the scripts I run get sent to the correct Service Management API. Okay. So what this says, it's created a new, it's created the first VM. Excuse me. It's created the first VM, it's created the second VM. It's actually created all of them now. It's actually created the 3rd one. So let's go back and have a look. Virtual machines here. So there we are, SHPT DC. Let me go back. SHPT DC, SHPT SQL, and there's that one. It's actually in the process of starting, so it's going through the process of starting, but it hasn't actually got into a running state yet. Okay, how much time have we got? We got like a couple of minutes over now, aren't we? No, we got 2 minutes left. That's okay. So as soon as that one's finished, what I'll do next is just show you how you would get rid of your lab, and that is to remove SharePoint. So there's another PowerShell script you can use for this. And that's where we specify the service name we want to remove from, the names of the various machines, SharePoint 1, the domain controller, the SQL server, and then we just simply stop the machine and then remove it. Stop it, remove it, stop it, remove it. So by remove it, what it means is that it takes the machine off the hypervisor that it's loaded onto. But the state of that machine is persisted in the blob storage where your data is stored. So if you look at, you need to also think about data at this point. So if we go back and have a look at pricing, and I go to Pricing details, storage. This is what storage will cost. So there's two types of storage. Geographically redundant, that's in dollars. Let me change it to pounds. Any second? So there's two types of way of storing your data. Excuse me, I'm getting tangled up in the cables here. Each of the data centers around the world has an automatic pairing. So in Europe, it's always North Europe and West Europe. They're a pair. South Asia and Southeast Asia, they're a pair. And over in the US, it's the north and south, and the east and the west. So you see it says geographically redundant. Within a data center, any blob that I have, so that's a .vhd as far as you're concerned in this, is written onto 3 separate disks in the data center itself. So it would take the failure of 3 separate disks, which will be on 3 separate power supplies, battery backup units, network segments, routers. There's no common infrastructure between them all. And then by default, it's automatically replicated to the other data center. And if you do a write into a blob, you automatically get 3 copies of it. So you've got 6 copies of your data. So 6 copies of your data for the first terabyte is just over half a penny per gigabyte per month. If you want to switch this off, then you can switch that feature off, and then you'll be paying just under half a penny per gigabyte per month. I sort of think, you know, for the...
Is that 6 pence?
No, 0.06.
Pounds.
Yeah, in pounds. So that would be... oh yeah, sorry, I got that right. 6 pence, my apologies. 6 pence.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, it is 10 times the price, isn't it? So it's worth knowing what it is. But you know, you can work out what those... Yeah. And I mean, compared to you know, buying a 1 terabyte disk, this is an incredibly expensive way of storing data, because you know, by the time, well, how much can you buy a 1 terabyte disk for? 30, 40 quid, something like that. Probably less than that these days. Go to the right place. You know, you add up 1 terabyte over a year, and it probably costs you twice as much. But one thing you don't get is your data written 3 times in a data center, geographically replicated across, actually across fault boundaries, all those sorts of things. So, you know, what you've got to compare is what you're getting for your money, not just you've got a disk, and all the electricity is paid for and all that kind of stuff, and all the operations that go to making sure that that data is available. So, in terms of...
It looks like good value to me, I must say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, compared to you know, some high-end storage subsystem, it's incredibly good value, I think.
What's the governing connection between yourself and one of these data centers? Like, if you've got a 1 gig connection to the internet, do you get a 1 gig connection to that data center?
Well, the connections from the internet to the data center, they're incredibly high-speed connections, and they've got multiple connections. So if you look at one of the data centers...
Could I host a machine there, my data in my local data center?
Well, you could do that. So let's imagine that this is Dublin, and let's imagine this is Amsterdam. You could run a virtual machine here, and you could have your data over here. Now, I think that's a bad thing to do, because the other thing you pay for is data egress from a data center. So any data that leaves the data center and goes onto the internet, you pay for that. And there's data transaction charges. Let's have a look at those. Storage transactions.
That includes data between your own data, Microsoft data centers.
Include, yeah, if it goes onto the internet, you have to pay for it, okay? So it's only when you're pulling data. If you're pushing data, so if you're uploading some data, you don't pay for that. But if you pull data out of a data center...
Replication going on, is that integral to the service, or is it data?
Yeah, so the replication that happens between 2 data centers automatically, the storage transaction for that is included in the price. But so you pay for storage transactions, and you pay for bandwidth. So let's find the bandwidth. Pricing details. Let's go back and find it. Data services. Network, here we go, data transfers. That's in cents. It doesn't remember the currency. British pound. So the first 5 gigabytes is free, but after that you're paying 7.5 pence per gigabyte for each gigabyte that you... Zone 2 is Asia, basically. So 7.5 pence, just over 7.5 pence per gigabyte that gets pulled onto the internet. So you can see if you've got a really busy application with a lot of data moving between the two, if this was an operating system, that would be an expensive way of doing it. So much better to put your data and your compute resources together. And we have things called affinity groups which allow you to group things together in that way.
Sticking with the data, not in a data center, as in local to yourself, and the machine running.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so another thing you could do is you can create a virtual network between a data center and your own data center here where you may have some data. But if at any stage you pull data out of this data center onto this network here, you have to pay for it. Any stuff that goes that way is free, because to go from the internet onto or into the data center is free, but you have to pay for that. I got an example of a customer who was paying something, their total data charges were something like 300 quid a month for this application that they had. And then they suddenly went up to £1,000 a month, and they couldn't understand it. And it was in the old portal. When you deployed an application, you could say, where do you want to deploy it to? And it could say, Europe, North Europe, West Europe, or anywhere Europe. And what they did was they deployed their SQL database to anywhere Europe and their application to anywhere Europe. Well, it just picks some random location. And so they'd actually deployed their the application in one place, the database into another, and the result was they ended up paying more and getting poorer performance as well. So, you know, as long as you're careful about these things and think about them. Okay. So that's basically it. I want to deprovision now. Let me just show you that thing that's provisioned. So I've got all my SharePoint, my second SharePoint infrastructure running here. It's a smaller one. It's 2013. It's a bit different. So if I now want to deprovision that, then I can just run that script. Just move this out of the way so we can see the status.
If I was to provision a lab and you were to provision a lab,
Yeah.
and we both picked Dublin, could we interconnect our labs?
Yeah, well, we can't interconnect, we can't directly interconnect them inside the data center, excuse me. The thing which separates things like that is subscriptions. So I'd have one subscription, and that's an island, and you'll have another subscription, and that's an island. And the only way of connecting these two things together is to go across the internet, yeah. If I've got, you know, like a cloud service in here and a VM in here, I can put them onto the same virtual network, and that's a way of connecting things together within a subscription. But across subscriptions, the only way to do it is to hit the internet to do it. So let's run that script there. So that's just going to go through the process now of stopping these machines and removing them. So over a period of time, we will see these machines, these SHPT machines, disappear from this. So, you know, it's quite a neat thing to do. Build your labs, have the ready configurations that you want, get your free subscription, fire them up whenever you need them with PowerShell, and undeploy them. So all of this talk, you know, all the stuff that I've said here, plus the only thing that's not going to be in the talk is the whiteboard stuff. But everything that was on the screen is going to be there. You'll be able to see the scripts if you wanted to copy them, but I'll also post them onto my blog so you can get hold of them if you want to. Okay, that's it. Thank you. If you've got any questions, just ask away. No? Great, I'm off.
That's the first time I've actually seen an Azure demo.
Okay.